Ah, what you think? You think Mons looks funny in this? Well, fuck you. I don't even know what to say actually as an insult in that voice. Oh my. So I called today's stream. I don't even know if I'm gonna pronounce this right. Oh no, I rubbed coffee on the shirt. Sometimes you just forget. Mensonges de Liberté. Um, which, if I did the translation correct, should translate to falsehoods of liberty. And I primarily named this falsehoods of liberty. I kind of actually wrote it out in the description, but I don't know if anybody ever reads those. not not to ever imply that viewers don't. It's just I wonder if it's a current trend. Like, do people do that? Like, I don't know. I actually like looking at people's descriptions because I've noticed some YouTubers write stuff in there. I'm one of them. So I wrote some babble on the falsehoods of our reality, which by that I mean the reality, or I should actually emphasize on liberty and the reality of what liberty is. Not to bash on the concept of freedom of choice, I largely think in Western ideological spheres of influence, yes, the concept of freedom is not only foreign, but a non-option in the minds of modern men and women. Desires and the chase of fulfillment through the states of stimulated highs are the current MO. A chase of hyper-real, hype culture. Because everybody, and it's not everybody, it's just that it's what we've learned to do. It's what our programming has taught us to do. And by programming, I mean, what's the trend of what does everybody want to be when they're kids, right? I want to grow up to be an astronaut. I want to grow up to be this or that. And it largely has a lot to do with what you see on television, what you grow up to perceiving as status, what you grow up to perceiving as what gives you the most money while you're growing up, or there's a variety of factors that go into building the perception of what to do as a young adult, or anybody in that case. But there is that, how do I say this? There is an element of understanding that our reality isn't largely, it's largely dictated, but it became that way. So once people started figuring out the habits of man and started figuring out that people play out certain repetitive patterns, and once they realized that what they've learned with behavioral science when Pavlov was working on his dogs, they learned that people largely themselves can be affected and become influenced by these same mechanisms. They're just more complicated. And some people have, right, there are resistance factors, right? The more educated somebody is in this field or in that kind of woo-woo, the more resilient they are to any tactics being implemented onto them. It's why, can't remember the documentary, but there's a lot of them. There's a lot of attempts to show the public states of hypnotism, and how while you're under this hypnosis, you will, how do I say this? They can program you to have certain functions that you never grew up with, right? If you were never a sharpshooter, if you never learned how to shoot a gun, they could hypnotize you, make you believe that you're one of the best shooters in the world, and you're immediately hitting all your shots within, the rings of circles, which is something only a professional could do, etc., etc. The point goes on. So there is this state of what people think liberty is and what they think freedom is. Now, in reality, I wanted to call this I just wanted to talk about like freedoms, liberty, just that whole aspect of like freedom of choice. Like, do you believe that you're free of any influence? Do you believe that there is no determining factors in who you are as a person? That, right, could you measure out what effects as a kid influenced you in being the way you are now as an adult? Are there any of these factors? Are there any of these identifying markers? And I largely believe that yes, a lot of the culture that we consume is very specific in nature. And, you know, somebody like me, I can notice it because I ended up liking a bunch of different shows from like different countries. So, right, to some degree, I was watching novellas as a kid. Later, when I grew up, I started watching cartoons, not just from America, but from Japan. And I started watching the differences between how, even the differences between English cartoons and Mexican cartoons. It was the same cartoon series, but I noticed that some of the words were different and they would pronounce things differently and they would portray characters very differently. And that's when I started paying attention to voice acting, the inflections of the voice. I started so right. I expanded my thought process because I got exposed to a variety of different things. And in Mexico, so you know how like in America you have bootleggers, but like people who sell fake DVDs on like the front of stores or in parking lots or et cetera, et cetera. I don't know. Inner city people might understand what I'm talking about. So these people in Mexico specifically, they don't have just movies from America. They have movies from everywhere, and they'll actually translate them and have Mexican Spanish subtitles. I was gonna say Mexican subtitles. Come on, guy. Right? Like, aren't you supposed to know this? So with this, as a kid, I grew up watching like French films because when I would go every summer to my grandma's village, I would hang out with these people and I would always hang out at the cyber cafe. That's if if I was in Mexico, I would not visit family. I would just be like, later, mom, I'm gonna go to the cyber cafe. I'm just gonna go play on the computers like peace. That was me. I was that kid. I would get to know the owner, and this specific summer, I got to know the owner, and we were watching like just a plethora of different films, just a variety of films that were like, who knows? Like I remember the Spanish they were speaking was not like the sort of Mexican Spanish that I would normally see. So I'm pretty sure I saw like Argentinian films, Brazilian films, because the way that they were speaking was out of sync, but they definitely weren't white. I watched some French films, some Spanish films. So I started, but I always knew, like, I just have a better memory than most, I guess, even though I have factors in my life that would suggest otherwise. Um, that I started kind of piecing together that American television was very angular, narrow minded, and there was a lack of cadence towards their material. There was no real flow sometimes. And the few times there was, there were factors to it, but then somewhere along the way of that television show or of that movie series, things go astray because money gets more involved, etc., etc. Like things happen. Decisions are made, board meetings are had, whatever the case may be for whatever situation. So once I started, I'm not going to say that I actively was reprogramming myself, right? I'm not re educating myself. Actually, it was a form of re education, but instead I was like reading Plato, I was reading mythology. I actually started, if I was having a debate or if I was thinking of a certain topic and writing about it, I would stop myself and ask, like, wait, where did this particular theory of mine come from? Is this my own thought? Was this something I learned in school? Like, when did I ever corroborate this like theory or this idea or this specific event in history? And through that, I started realizing that there were a lot of falsehoods in what we believe. We think freedom is to have our own liberties of getting to decide what we do, getting and not having, I'm not sure how to say this, but what do you think liberty is? What do you think freedom is? Of course, we could look at the definition, but I think what matters more is what people believe it is, because that's more important. Because it's, you know, I kind of bring up Machiavelli's book, Nicholas Machiavelli, The Prince. He talks about how there was predominant families in Italy that they took over specific cities not through disputing the lineages and not through disputing who had the right of rulership in these areas. Instead, what they did was they appealed to the court of public opinion. They appealed to the masses, and it was the masses themselves that kicked out their own leadership, and putting in the new leadership. And but at the end of the day, by the time the citizens came to knowing that this was a bad idea, history tells the rest. Because people are just so ignorant to understanding that. I'm like, yeah, you can get manipulated, and yeah, you can get played, and it's not very nice. But there's a lot to it. Now, before I lose my train of thought, when it comes down to freedom and liberties, we'd like to think that we have them. We like to think that we can exercise these faculties of our existence. But with the way, as of right now, in this point in time, with the way the external factors are, with the way the media is, with the way corporations are, with the way movie production studios is, with the way culture is the way it is, with the way whatever infrastructure you want to look at this as, these are basically, it's creating an environment that allows a certain amount of discussion. It allows a certain kind of existence. Because I could give you a very easy identifiable marker, right? Zoomers grew up seeing these kids come to school with capes on, and they were like anime capes, right? I grew up at a time where you would never see anybody ever talk about their hobbies, what they liked. Like, if it wasn't what everybody else was doing, nobody would mention it. Nobody would talk about it. Nobody would ever try to define themselves out of the groupthink that was around everybody else. Because if you said that you liked anime, the only response you would get out of people is like, oh, this fool watches hentai. This fool likes watching those anime titties, this and that. Right? It was a very angular way of looking at life. Not to say it was a bad thing, but our current paradigm, our current understanding of the reality is dictated by some factor, and how to influence that. What would I call it? The social ether, because at the end of the day, it's like a form of groupthink that comes from a hive mind mentality. Who knows? But the point is, with the way things are currently right now, and I would say since 1960, from that point on, culture has been this clay thing. What's that movie, Ghost? You got Patrick Swayze behind you, just helping you mold this fucked up MK Ultra control mechanism for humanity. Because in a weird way, that is weird, right? How there are dudes who lives in the minds of chicks for years and years, and they'll build up their entire paradigm and expectations built on some dude who doesn't exist in their life anymore. But I don't know. I just thought it was funny, right? That whole movie Ghost. But the minds of men as it is now, it's just kind of like some soft little putty, and the response and what it constantly looks for is more stimulant, more experience. I want to feel more. I want me to feel special. I want me to distinguish self, because that's what the movies are. That's what TV shows have done, right? They build up this hyper realistic expectation of their culture, and then it becomes this hype culture where it's like, I have to outdo this person, or I have to outdo that person. So it just stacks. I can understand why aspects of certain futuristic movies now portrayed some of these people wearing some weird ass fucking fashion, because with the way it looks now is, yeah, with all the colorful hair and the weird obsession of modifying bodies to such degrees, I can understand why some of these directors were depicting the future to look like some weird fashion show. I don't know. Which goes to show you, right? The fashion industry, even they know, they stopped giving a fuck about influencing that woo-woo, because they realize that they can't influence that. They can't win that aspect of the culture war. that they were just like, well, we're gonna keep doing our own weird shit, but whatever. In the back end of things, who is the most predominant? Who are the most predominant figures in current hip hop culture in the clothing industry? Is what I'm saying, right? Like, what are a lot of these rappers wearing currently nowadays? That will usually dictate to you what Zoomers are wearing. Like, unironically, I remember growing up with this brand called Champions. That shit was a shit brand, dude. Like, I think you would buy it at Fias, or it just was not a brand that was associated with being like cool or being in style ever, right? So when my sister gave me one of those for like my birthday, that was a couple years ago, she gave me a sweater from Champions, and I was like, oh, cool. Like, all I thought to myself was, why did you give me this? Because this is a sister that cares about status, cares about looks, and all that other shit. So I'm like, you've always given me like some weird, extravagant ass gifts, right? But the one time I was like, okay, I thought you just gave me like some normal ass fucking sweater, right? Come to find out, through my nephew, right? Because he's much younger than me, so he's obviously caring about this social paradigm. He's like, hey, can I have your sweater? And I looked at him and I'm like, what the fuck? What do you want my sweater for, dude? He's like, dude, it's a Champion sweater. And I looked at him and I was like, no, you can't have my sweater. What the fuck? You're weird, dude. Whatever. And I walked out of the kitchen, went back to doing whatever I was doing, only later to ask my buddy, like, hey, would you happen to know why my nephew asked me for this sweater? And he's like, bro, Champions is all the rage, this and that. And I'm like, what the fuck? So things swing back and forth. So what people think liberty is or freedom is, that shit swings back and forth without realizing that you have none of that. Like, we have illusions of options. There is no real option. You're only really allowed to pick out what's been put in front of you. So the more you know about it, the more effort there was into marketing, into making sure you knew their name, into making sure you knew the shape of whatever emblem they're using for their brand. That's why I love that meme where it's like, name these plants, right? Like, it's just leaves, name them, and nobody can name them. But name these corporations, it's like, psh, that's Mickey D's, that's Jordan, that's this, that's that. Like, it's so interesting that people don't understand that. If you know about it, if everybody knows about it, if there is a degree of everybody agreeing with you blindly, you really gotta ask yourself, is this the right group? Like, is this the right direction that I should be moving in? Not to say that there isn't, I don't know. I've just noticed that ever since 2018 moved on, and with the Justice Kavanaugh hearing, and with this social paradigm political speech game that everybody's playing, it's very angular. It's a very one-sided direction of how people should view the world. And so I think a great example is I saw the evolution of the rhetoric used in order of like how to hate Trump, right? So it was just a variety of loops to just Orange Man bad. And whatever you found yourself politically or whoever you were listening to, at one point in time, each and every single one of these talking heads found a new way to spin the way that you should say Orange Man bad. Whatever it was, without kind of like, thinking outside the box, like, not thinking outside the box, actually thinking inside of the box. So looking at the John Durham case and noticing, like, all right, if Hillary jail, what are the circumstances or what are the steps that are required in order for that to happen? Right? You have to build a case. You have to lay down foundational facts. You have to, there's a variety of things that have to happen in order for that objective or that thing, in order for that thing to be real and in order for that to happen. You have to build a case. Well, how would you build a case? Where was the lie? Where can you find paperwork? Where can you build evidence? And where can you stack that up from? And people are like, well, I want it now. And I'm like, well, that takes a few years, because I think the quickest RICO case to ever happen was like a year and a half or a year and 2 months. I'm not too sure. So it's like you want to build one of the most sophisticated cases against the criminal enterprise that is so deeply rooted that it goes all the way to the DoD, the Pentagon, and every single alphabet soup agency that government has. And you want it now? Just now? And then there's just levels of like, if it was realistically going to happen in a legal fashion or in a legal manner, it wouldn't be so quick. So it comes down to this thing of the fallacy of liberty and the fallacy of freedom, because we think we have these things, but we don't, right? As long as that lie is a perpetual state in the minds of people, that they think that they have freedom and they think that they have liberty, nah. Like, if that lie keeps being propped up, aspects of a lot of other things won't move forward. And the reason why I believe that is because it's a false foundation. How will any results get done on a false foundation, right? It's why I think how Sussman got off the case, because he supposedly made false statements. Who knows, right? Because there is just aspects of playing rhetoric, playing verbiage, and redirecting what concepts are in the minds of people. I don't know. The freedom of choice, the freedom of the concept of freedom and the concept of liberty, I don't believe exist in our current modern day sphere, because our expectations, our minds, our dopamine receptors, the way we interact with the world and with the way we expect the world to interact with us is this exchange. It's almost like I put this much money in and I expect this much out, right? So you expect to get a certain amount of dopamine hit when you swipe right, or you swipe left, or you swipe up, or you swipe down, or you give a like. Or our minds have been studied in that fashion. They have, like, there's never been a study to be like, all right, how can we make the most efficient human being? How can we make the most efficient person, the most efficient boy, the most efficient girl under the circumstances of a single mom home? Like, nobody's done that research, and nobody ever will do that research because it's not profitable, right? We live in a profit-driven society in which, right, they'd rather set up the conditions, they'd rather give you these false options in life to make sure that you don't move from this point and on, right? It's kind of this catch-22 all where, oh, we never did anything to you. We never made you make those decisions, where it's like, yeah, but you created the entire, right? You've made everybody shit. And now, because you just have a bunch of shitty people walking around, it's like, oh, we didn't do that. It was all the other shitty people. When it's like, these conditions had to be created somehow. But people would just be like, well, we never did anything. And it's just like, yeah, obviously you didn't. But you protecting the people that get to make these policies, get to make all these decisions, are creating these circumstances which are creating these sorts of individuals. But yet you just want to obfuscate the fact that we're not saying you did. We're saying the people that you're protecting did. And it becomes this whole identity driven thing where, well, you're attacking them, now you're attacking me. It's like, bro, I didn't know you were a priest, and I didn't know you were diddling boys. Like, you know what I mean? Like, just because you're a Catholic doesn't mean I'm talking about you. I'm talking about the Catholic organization. The dudes in the funny robes. The dudes who think they're above the law because whatever reason, whatever religious handshake people do behind the scenes. Falsehoods of liberty and man. Crazy. That's the way I look at it. It's like, apply the standard all around. And if nobody wants it, well, nobody ever thinks about that. That's the way I think about things. And that's why I have my opinions. Because you think you have liberty? You think freedom exists? Yeah, dude. Like, meanwhile, they'll be drinking their Starbucks with their iPhone watch. Right, with their iPhone watch, with the newest iPhone. Without ever questioning, like, like, Is this iPhone actually the best of the best? Is this Apple Watch the best of the best? Or was I just or were the commercials or was it presented to me in such a way to make me believe that these are the best of the best? And a lot of the times, yeah, it was all a marketing scheme, right? I just saw a great video that pointed out that every single cup, I don't know the sizes of Starbucks, but basically from small to large, right? The small cup, the medium looking cup, and the large looking cup. If you grab the small cup and you fill it to the brim, that amount of liquid will fit in both the medium and the large cup. And it's just like your brain would imagine, right? Just like a kid who ever has that volume experiment where they'll have different shaped glasses, but the same amount of liquid will fit into each and every single one of those different sized glasses. It's like there's like this giant litmus test, and we're all failing it because we've been studied like animals. I'm not saying like everybody's evil in the corporation industry, but it's like not everybody, but the people who get to take all this research and then publicize it underneath a corporation name and then obfuscate the reality of what scientists did the work, obfuscate even the reality that is given to him, because that scientist who did the work for the corporation thinks that that research will be used for good. Hell no, that shit will get shelved. It's like, oh well, we thought we got, like, because they expect a certain result when they do research and development. They're expecting a desired result when they're doing research and development. Well, if it doesn't fit their MO, if it doesn't fit the agenda, if it doesn't fit this narrow-minded path, they're not going to use it. They're just going to shelve it, and they're not going to give a fuck about it. It's why they would still rather kill the inventors or people who want to push water cars, because it doesn't fit the paradigm. It doesn't allow China to have the monopoly of lithium in Africa. It doesn't allow Elon the narrative to create his electric cars. So instead, they'd rather just kill that idea, not ever allow it to exist. Right? If water levels are rising, wouldn't it be a good idea to use water as a fuel source to make sure that we use up the water to make sure that we don't drown? But whatever. I'm not even trying to make a solution for this. I'm just pointing out that nobody will ever think these things out. And that's what I love the most about it, because now people are kind of like doing the math of like, all right, well, this one, there's a 1 here. Well, there's a 4 over there. And then they're piecing it together of how the equation goes. And they're just like, oh. But the media is telling me that this equation's wrong. But I checked my math. I redid it. Right? Like, oh, well, they say 2 + 2 = 5, but I got the sticks and I counted them all. Like, you know what I mean? Funny as fuck. That's falsehoods of, what did I even call this thing? Mensonges de Liberté? The falsehoods of liberty. Liberty ain't real. Freedom ain't real. It's why propagandists exist. It's why you kind of like need the hype man, the MC, the master of ceremony, right? Like, that's why, as bad as Freemasons are, whatever people think, you really have to look at the organization from an outside point of view of, look at what they're doing. Look at what philosophy these people are propagating. And one of the things that I believe that is a philosophical truth in Freemasonry is how they operate themselves on a black and white board. They see themselves as players. They see themselves as pieces of a chessboard that they create circumstances. They bring about some sort of energy from the ether that other people around them will get enthralled by. They'll get caught up in, right? Like, we could look at Thomas Paine and Common Sense. Like, he was a very, I believe that he wouldn't call himself a propagandist, but in reality, his work became that, because he was appealing to what he considered common sense, when propagandists now today, they appeal to what people's common sense is. Not what common sense really is, but they're appealing to other people's identity, and they're appealing to what they consider those group of people to have as common sense because they would have common values. So, right, Thomas Paine, I can't remember, I haven't read that nigga's book yet, but apparently common sense is written using a lot of arguments from the Bible. But the reason why he used the Bible as a reference to was because he believed that the population of America at that time could understand what ideas he was putting forth. So yes, he was using a different book as a reference source to make his case point and to show, to show the people a larger picture. He didn't want to be a propagandist. He was just trying to appeal to people's minds. While others, or at least what I consider current day propagandists, what they do is they'll appeal to just what your identity is, what your core values are. And when I say core values, I'm not saying these values are neither good nor bad. They're just values a person or a particular group of people have. But in order to understand that, you would have to understand what markers of influence exist in people's lives. But in doing that, if you've already poisoned the pool of what people see and what people experience, well, you already know what kind of individual they're going to be. So, kind of like emo music, the kids, or when, not kids, this is just anybody. Under certain circumstances, through the social paradigm and how whatever experience this person feels, if they ever find themselves at the end of being an outcast or feeling like they don't belong, they're going to look for music that appeals to that sense of existence, right? So in that way, people will create their own realities purely based on what music they listen to, on what television shows they read, on what novels they read, and more importantly, for the really rotten women on the internet, whatever fan fiction you read. That's a whole other basket case of like problems. Because now you have a bunch of hyper realistic content that's coming out of like non-realistic imagination, but then it's being read through the lens of like popular characters that you would see on television. Like, I don't know, man. Like, I always thought it was freaking weird that people could like whack off to like DBZ or like Naruto like dojins, and I'm just like, how are you doing this? Like, how could you see Naruto that way? Like, it was the weirdest shit. But the reality of people is largely built on whatever media people ingest and whatever experiences you kind of like build out of that whole thing. I feel like I just repeated myself. Going back to Mensonges de Liberté, the falsehoods of liberty. Some babble on the falsehoods of reality, not to bash the concept of freedom of choice. Yeah. Oh yeah, the best part that I wrote in my description was, I liked it the most, was, yes, the concept of freedom is not only foreign, but a non-option in the minds of modern men and women. So yeah, I believe that people cannot exercise their freedom of will largely because of our desires, and largely because of how our desires have been hijacked with our, what would you call them, our basic needs. They've been intertwined, and the system uses this to its benefit in order for us to work alongside that system. I don't know if that makes sense. Probably doesn't, but hey. Because it all has to do with, like, what are you working for? What's your desire? You know, one of the greatest things I recently heard about what a paycheck was, or what that whole aspect of things are, is, you know, when somebody was offering you a salary, when somebody was offering you a job, what they were offering you was, in fact, how much do I have to pay you in order for you to give up your dreams? In order for you to stop doing what you want to do with your life, how much do I have to pay you? And that's when things largely changed. Because nobody, I don't think ever nobody in human existence would have imagined the commodities market being what it is now. Seeing what the market industry became, seeing how sweets, how pastries, how industry has largely evolved, and how innovation. I don't even want to say innovation because there's that whole aspect of, were electric vehicles a thing of the past or were they a thing only of the future? And what's the obfuscation of, was there some sort of, I'm not even going to go there. That goes into Tatari and a bunch of other stuff. There's much, I feel, to be explored of what is freedom, and does that concept exist, or liberty, or the freedom of choice. I want to see. I'm actually going to write this out a little more just to see how much I can disprove that concept in the current spheres of Western influence. Right? From Europe, I don't know, you can't really say Russia, but you can say aspects of Eastern Europe to any westernized part of the world. Is it real? Is the freedom of choice a reality? Because from what I see is, it's a bunch of indoctrination camps wrapping the idea of our existence around the infrastructure that was put before us. But the infrastructure that was put before us was built and designed by a bunch of men who had no real incentive in allowing you to do your own thing. Crazy stuff. Now I'm gonna go bug off, go take a bike ride, and think about more about this stuff. I'll see you on the flip side, and I'll also see you down the rabbit hole.